All right. I'm always here. All right. Find that now. Thank you.
First, we can start coming to the.
Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Let's
Figure it out. Yep, got it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's coming out of peak a little bit.
All right, thank you all for being here. Please make sure you get seated. I am Dr. Lisa Potts. I am associate professor in the Auerbach School of Occupational Therapy. I also serve as the chair of the Research Ethics Committee. So this training today is just for you all that serve in some capacity as faculty advisors. That is the mandatory training. We're required in some way to make sure that investigators know about the federal regulations that govern such research. So that is the purpose of this training. It is being recorded. Thank you for your technical help. I'm gonna go through this with Kahoot to try to mix it up and make it a little bit interactive. And there are some already previous trainings from previous years on our website. And eventually then I'll get this recording and the slides, associated slides on the REC. All right. I have it kind of set up again, like I said, so it can be a little bit interactive. But this time I kind of want to try like any specific, like my project specific related questions, right after those to the end. Just since this is kind of a longer discussion anyways, just to respect the student. But happy to answer those questions at the end. So we do have a new graduate assistant this year. Stephanie Lewis. So far, she's been really, really great, but she is brand new, so just be patient with us. So this thing's gonna work. All right. So what I plan to go through, I do try to change this up each year, so you're not just sitting through the same thing. This year, I'm going to focus a little bit more on applying the common rule, like what the 3 principles are that we really focus on. A little bit more info on the different types of research, review levels and categories. There's a few REC policies that we adopted over the past year, so I want to make sure everyone's aware of those. And then just kind of touch on the proposal components and what your role as a faculty advisor is. And so that'll be a little bit integrated as we kind of go through the presentation. And then at the end, have I think a slide or two just on like some ideas of how you might be able to incorporate the REC process in your courses to help really set students up for success. So that is the plan. All right, so Research Ethics Committee, we are a faculty senate committee. We are separate from the Office of Sponsored Programs and Research. And essentially, we are here to protect the safety and privacy of human subjects research participants. So this is our list of duties and responsibilities that's on the Faculty Senate Canvas page. I'm not going to read those all to you, but they're there. And then essentially, we are making sure that the research that's conducted here is in accordance with the federal regulations from the Department of Health and Human Services that are governed by the Office for Human Resource Protection, so OHRP. So if you see OHRP throughout, or if I say that, that's what we're talking about, where the regulations are found. All right, so like I said, kind of integrating faculty role from the beginning. Just the students need your help. Like even as faculty, sometimes it can be a little bit unclear or confusing. It's just not the type of perspective that we're used to having in terms of this research ethics kind of lens. So they definitely need your help. So one thing, just to be clear, right off from the get-go, when students are submitting their proposal to the REC, you as the faculty advisor should always be the one listed as the primary investigator or the principal investigator. So even though the student may be the primary one, like actually doing all the work, you are technically considered the principal investigator and the student is a co-investigator. So, and we'll circle back to the roles a little bit later in the presentation. One thing that I'm going to kind of reference, also sort of integrated in a few places throughout, is this proposal worksheet, which a few of the psychology faculty helped me develop last year or the year before. And there is a link here. And when I publish the PDF online, you'll be able to like have access to all of these links that are in here as well. So I did bring a handful of copies, like if maybe there's like one person from each department that would like a printed copy to see the full worksheet, that's there, but it's just a good resource to kind of help understand, like in preparation for writing and preparing the proposal. So that's what that is. All right, so what is human subjects research? That is the question. So here's your first question. Which one is HSR? Good, yes. So there's all different types of projects or research that we might do. But we really have to look at what is actually qualifies as human subjects research. So as far as the OHRP regulations go, there are essentially these two questions that you need to ask or have your students think about. And again, these are like some of the first things on this worksheet. And so these questions are actually on the job form in REC. And I think sometimes people take for granted like the actual words that we're asking when they answer these questions, because it really is trying to understand, are you actually doing research or not? And then if so, does that actually involve human subjects? So if you have to think about intent, right? To determine, is this really a research activity or is this more like a program improvement or evaluation type of thing? So if you really are trying to contribute generalizable knowledge or taking a systematic approach to whatever the question is, then that would be research. It does not necessarily mean that you are going to publish your research. So sometimes people will use the intent to publish as like a qualifier, which it sort of indirectly relates to it, but in and of itself is not a qualifier for research. So this wording with the sole intent to improve the process at a specific organization, that would be like program evaluation, program improvement, or program development or something like that. So if that's the only purpose, then that's not human subjects research. A lot of times what happens is there's some sort of program that's been developed, but then someone wants to take a systematic approach to evaluating that program. And so then that still is research. Right, so then second piece, how is human subjects defined? Again, kind of going back to that program eval comparison. you really need to look at like, what are you asking questions about? So even if you're asking questions from a person, if you're getting them to fill out information, if they are filling out information about, you know, like at the end, I have a survey for you to fill out about this training. Like, was it helpful? Do you have suggestions? That's not research. I'm not asking about you, and I'm only using that information to make this better next year. Okay. So those are two important questions. So just make sure that your students understand to not just click through the form. I think that does happen sometimes. And then we feel nitpicky because we're going back like, what did you mean by this? Why did you click this option? And like, that's not what we're here trying to do. So we are trying to apply the common rule, which is based on 3 principles. So beneficence, respect for persons, and justice. So ultimately, this captures all the things that we are considering from the research ethics standpoint when we are reviewing proposals. So over here are some resources. You can access the regulations directly. Also, the HIPAA privacy rule is one that we have to kind of look at and consider a lot of times, especially with records-based research. Or, you know, if someone's wanting to access different types of information for their project, also the link to city training, and then our policies and procedures. So there should be some helpful resources for you. And then I think this should be a live link too, that explains that common rule. All right, so applying this. So applying beneficence, what does that mean? What are we looking at? This is essentially weighing the risks versus the benefits. And so that's where one of the first parts of this worksheet that we developed is getting you to think about, why is this project important? Is it actually going to benefit someone other than I need to do this for my dissertation? So we do understand that students are on a tight timeline and that they have capstone dissertation requirements for their programs. We totally understand that. But sometimes I think the perspective gets a little off, in that it's like, I just have to get this done for my dissertation, just give me approval. And there are some times where it's like, I'm sorry, but we can't just let you do something just because you need your dissertation to get through. So just helping students to be mindful of that we really are trying to protect people's well-being and privacy. So we have to think about the benefit versus the risk. All right, so with that, then what is risk? So I think we have another question here. There's more than one on this one. So there are multiple things to think about whenever you're considering what could introduce risk for participants or even just potential participants. So we will kind of talk through some of these as we go. All right, so there are all the different aspects of the project to keep in mind, right? And when you're thinking about risks, just a reminder that I think a lot of people do think about right away, like the physical and, you know, maybe like the psychosocial impact that something might have. But, a lot of times, some of these other things can be overlooked. So I feel like especially recently, we've had a lot where maybe like employability has factored into it in our discussions in REC, where it's, just kind of been overlooked that that could be a factor to consider. So just make sure that you and your students are keeping this in mind, that, there's different types of risk. And try to put yourselves in the shoes of the potential participant. Like, how would you feel if your employer or someone was asking you to participate in this research? Would you be inclined to do it or not? Would you feel, okay about what if my boss finds this information, all those types of things. All right, so, and that's just, this section of the, worksheet. Again, I kind of like hate this about the role, but essentially we are sort of thinking of like, what is the worst case scenario that could happen, which isn't really, not a great mindset to go through life with, but when it comes to reviewing proposals and trying to protect human research participants, we really do just need to think about, okay, where could this go wrong? Because then you can go back and think about how can we potentially modify the procedural details to reduce the likelihood of those things happening. And so I think this is one part where a lot of times I think students especially maybe are nervous about acknowledging that their research may be particularly risky. And so just kind of gloss over with like, there may be some risks or there could be minimal risks, and don't really want to explain those, maybe out of fear that like, we're just going to deny it or something like that. But really that's really not the case. It's just that the risks need to be disclosed. And there are some times where we may say, we feel like the risks here are way greater than the potential benefit, and you need some serious modification before we're gonna approve this. That does happen sometimes, or, I think it happens rarely that it does get denied, but for the most part, it's just, you need to acknowledge the risk and you need to disclose those to the potential participants in the consent. Because, then it's been disclosed and they are truly having informed consent to decide whether or not they want to participate. If it's not acknowledged in the proposal and disclosed in the consent form, and then something happens, then we're in kind of a worse situation where now we have some maybe potentially adverse event reporting that has to happen. So those are unanticipated events that have to be reported. So if it's anticipated, we still ask you to let us know about those things happening, like just for continuing review. But that's different than if you didn't expect it and now something bad's happening. So less paperwork, you just put it out there for you. All right, so like it said on that previous slide, essentially the level of risk is going to inform the type of review or the level of review that's needed. So these are our different categories. I have a few slides to go over, just like thinking about some of the exemptions that are that might apply. And you may notice that I kind of adjusted our timeline here. I don't feel like that's really because we're taking longer on the REC side, but trying to just be a little bit more realistic about, there's almost always the back and forth process that's happening. And so as much as possible, if you can have your classes set up or advise your students to think about like, okay, when is your target date for starting this? And then let's work backwards from there to when you want to have this submitted to REC, and then work backwards from there for preparing it, and so that it's complete and accurate and addresses all of the components. So we do try to have for exempt and expedited reviews, a turnaround time on our end from when it's assigned and back with a response of about 2 weeks. But again, we have a screening process, you know, that it's like, is everything there? Sometimes things are missing, so that can delay that. So that's why it can take a little bit longer. All right. So the next one, respect for person. So basically, respecting individual autonomy and those considerations. So what does that look like? Yeah, so there are some different ways that you can take this principle into consideration. So informed consent, the recruitment process, and all of these things. So we can, like I said, we'll kind of get to some more of those components at the end here. So the last principle that we're considering is justice. And I do think this is probably the most overlooked. I would say, I don't know, the other RAC members can chime in, but this is something that we need to consider is just, is the proposed research fair in terms of, you know, the target population, right? Like, why is that your target population? So the benefits and or the burdens both need to be distributed so that like it's not just always one group of people that is being asked to participate and maybe like shouldering the burden of research participation. All right, so this is part of that worksheet where it kind of goes through, it's a little bit into the vulnerable population piece, which I do have some slides going into that a little bit, what those different populations might look like. But you have to think about who getting the information from, what is that information going to be about? Might they be a vulnerable population? And is there going to be any kind of potential, you know, coercion or undue influence related to, you know, your procedures or the, you know, actual questions that you're wanting to answer? So basically thinking about inclusion, exclusion criteria. Does that align with things? So what does this look like? There's some proposed things you can think of. Yeah, so, and I should probably add a disclaimer for all of these questions, like they're not all inclusive. I just picked some key ones, like there could be other factors to think about. But yeah, so when you're thinking about justice, really thinking about what is your inclusion criteria or exclusion criteria. And like having good rationale for that, not just because I have easy access to these people. Or not just, oh, well, because I need such and such data points or whatever. I mean, you do need to factor in your methodology, and there should be a rationale for why you were choosing the methodology you are for answering your research question. But there should also be rationale that then goes back to this principle of justice, as well as the principle of, okay, the benefits, the beneficence, right? Benefits versus the risk when you're considering these things. So kind of summarizing all of these things, and I would probably argue that recruitment strategy could be listed under all of them. And again, I think that's one that a lot of people overlook, and we do not get much detail on the recruitment strategy or even sometimes the consent process. So the consent form will be there and it'll, you know, and the consent form is good, but we need to know, how are you going to obtain that consent? How are you even going to contact the individuals in the first place to even obtain that consent? So that's the recruitment strategy. So a lot of times it'll just be really brief, like, oh, we want to include certified nursing assistants to see, you know, what their job satisfaction is like. And it's like, okay, well, where are they? How are you contacting them? How are you getting that information? Do you work there with them? Like, just, you know, all of these kind of things. And so that's where that recruitment strategy piece goes in. Another piece, which I think I may be getting a little ahead of myself, but I'll just go ahead and say it, related to that recruitment strategy, is considering, again, like how you're going to go about finding people and what your recruitment script says, and is it appropriate for your method of recruitment. So for example, social media post. So that's a type of like snowball sampling, essentially, where people may share your post saying, hey, participate in my research. But if your post says something like, I need, you know, I'm looking, people who were recently incarcerated or something like that, you know, please share with your friends. So maybe they didn't want everyone to know that. And now you're like, hey, John Smith, I thought you might like to participate in this research. And now, like, everyone who sees that post knows that information about them. So it can be a violation of privacy, even though maybe it felt harmless, you know, at first when the student was putting that together. So there has to be a good balance, depending on what the recruitment strategy is, on the level of detail that's included in that recruitment script. You know, sometimes it may just be like, I need help with my research project on, you know, vague topic. And then if you're interested, click here, and then they open that and then they see the consent or whatever, and all the details are there. So we're not saying to hide the details, but not to publicize them, right? And then going back to this part right here, just thinking about that potential for coercion or undue influence, we have added places on our job form submission where it just asks, do you have a potential conflict of interest? And so again, like, it's okay if there is one, but it just needs to be disclosed, and it needs to be disclosed to participants as well. It may not necessarily only be financial. It could be if you have a status position over potential participants, like, you know, faculty and students, or employee and employer, that type of thing. We do have this review determination form on the website that if you really have kind of like looked through the worksheet, looked at the website, and you're still not really sure and you want some feedback, you can go in and fill that out, or advise your students to fill that out, where we do need like enough information to be able to help guide you. So if there's going to be, you know, survey research, it would be helpful if we at least know, even if you, ideally, if you have the full survey that you can provide us. But if, at least if you have like, these are the types of questions I'm going to ask, then we can give you a response and say, okay, yeah, you need to just submit a proposal. This is human subjects research. select exempt, select expedited, it's gonna need full board review, or this is not gonna qualify, and you're good to go. And sometimes people just need that letter from us, so we can provide you, you know, that on letterhead if need be, if that's all you really need. So that is there. That is probably, somewhat underutilized, I feel like. So, I mean, email is okay, but that's just more of kind of an official way for us to get that processed in our system. So determining the type of project and the level of review. So these are just some examples of different types of projects to go through. And then I do have some on here too about the exemptions, like I said. All right, so I'm not going to read all the bullet points to you, but there are decision charts out there. This American Association for Public Opinion Research has a good FAQ about survey research. A lot of times with survey research, it really might be anonymous. And so there's no need to collect the name, choose the checkbox option. In Question Pro, we do ask that you use Question Pro. If not, it's not a hard no, but we need to know why Question Pro isn't going to be used. And we also need to have some sort of assurance that it's a paid account or something where there is going to be some level of security with that account. Like they're not just going on like free Survey Monkey and anybody can get to it. So here are some of the things kind of going back to that program evaluation or quality improvement. So again, just think about, is the only or the sole purpose for process improvement? Okay, and then what kind of information are you getting? Is it about the person or is it about the program? And I think sometimes this is another one that's overlooked, but it could be both. Like there are some things that are program evaluation or improvement that may still fall over into that human subjects research category. So that's where you have to go back and think about, you know, all of those aspects. Records-based research, we're getting a little bit more of this more recently too. So there's a lot of words on this slide. Just some information here about this. Essentially, there's if the data is completely de-identified, and we usually kind of default to those 18 HIPAA identifiers with the privacy rule. So if it truly is de-identified, we need to know that that's not going to qualify as human subjects research. But then, you know, there's some other kind of stipulations here as well, where, you know, coded data may still fall into that category as not being human subjects research. We have a separate form for this. So if you or your students are doing records-based research, a lot of times referred to as archival research, then if that's the only thing they're doing, they don't need to fill out our proposal submission form. A lot of times there might be a project that is kind of have multiple components where you're still doing human subjects research and you need to fill out the proposal form and the records-based research. So I have a project in now where I had to do that, where it was both. So we do want the records-based research application separately because there are totally different questions that we ask on there. But it doesn't have to be to the extent of what is provided in that other. So there is an allowance for waiver of informed consent, and actually doing those checkboxes on survey research is technically considered a waiver of informed consent because they're not actually signing their names on that consent. There is a separate form for this if you are doing more traditional human subjects research but have one of these particular reasons for waiving consent other than doing that survey kind of checkbox type of thing. So all of these conditions have to be met in order for this to be allowed. got some, I think I've got a few. So most of you guys thought program eval. I'm sorry, I just realized I have a typo there. Okay, yeah, so some of these, it kind of will depend a little bit more on what the details are, but I was just trying to keep it as simple for the sake of going through the information. But yeah, like, so they're just wanting to, you know, improve patient outcomes simply by providing educational materials. So we do get a lot of that kind of thing, and that's fine. Probably a good time to mention that it's okay if you're not sure, really REC should be determining whether or not you're doing human subjects research. But you know, something like educational material development is okay, but then a lot of times people want to then kind of evaluate like before and after, like pre-test, post-test for those educational materials. So that's when it bleeds over and you're gonna be covered. Yeah, so I think that I would probably pick records-based research for that type of thing too. Again, probably need a little bit more information, but if you're looking at records to determine like, okay, how's this new tool might be used for diagnostics or something. Probably gonna fall in records-based research. So level overview. So I have quite a few slides over the exemption. I'm not gonna read it all to you. This is all on the REC website too, and there are links there to all the details and the decision charts, so you can read all the details. But essentially, exempt review means that there is no more risk than what one might encounter in everyday life or routine doctor's visit or like a routine psychological evaluation. So that is the qualifier for exempt research. If it is exempt, then technically it's not bound by the OHRP regulations. However, that does not mean that you don't need to submit a proposal. It is the REC that will determine whether or not the project is exempt. And so we really follow the same process. We ask for all of the same materials and appendices to review to make sure that your approach will be okay for it to be exempt. All right. And it is, you know, like it says here, it's still, or I think on the next slide, it's still best practice. Even if you're not bound by the regulations, it's still best practice to follow those. All right, so some categories, educational setting, surveys, interviews, we get a lot of those. Some qualifiers for this one. So I think this is one too where people want to think like, oh, I should just be able to do whatever because it's an interview. Or a survey or something like that. So you have to think about, you know, is this information going to be identifiable? We have quite a few, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who are on REC, but where people want to do Zoom interviews and record them, and then they literally write in their proposal that it's anonymous. And I'm like, well, what? So I think it's just, again, I think it's like this mentality of like, in the end, it's gonna be anonymous and nobody's gonna know who those people are.
Right.
But like, we have to look at and think about the whole process. It's not anonymous unless the information that's being filled out and collected has no identifiable information on it, or couldn't even be used to maybe match up all the information together and figure out who that person was. So you also have to include your inclusion criteria. Like, if you're only including people, in a very small pool, even if the specific questions in themselves may not be identifiable, if you put all that information together, it could be. So it's not always just real cut and dry. Like, we have to consider all of those things. So this is another big one. Just like, make sure you get your students using the correct terminology, especially in the participant facing information, recruitment and consent forms. So, sorry, that was a little bit of a soapbox. Okay.
So your REC members appreciate it.
Okay, so benign behavioral interventions, again, where you can't identify them, or if you could identify them, that disclosure won't put them at risk, okay? So I'm going kind of quickly through these, just again, you can read all the details to see what applies to you. So secondary research, which would kind of be, that information that's collected for non-research purposes, so like records-based type of research could be exempt, but it also may be expedited depending on, just depending on the details of what's in that records-based proposal. And I tried to highlight on here whether or not something applies to children, because not all of the exemptions apply to children. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna go back. So just real quick on this one, we do get some, especially with the records-based research, utilizing broad consent. This is something that I want us to work on, as far as REC policy goes, and also just kind of helping to educate faculty on as well. That our broad consent forms really should be very clear about what broad consent means. Like for future use of records or something like that, beyond just a little statement like in a clinic intake form that says, my information may be used for research. Ultimately, if it winds up being truly de-identified, that is okay. But a lot of times those forms are kind of written in a way where it's one signature lumped in with consent to treat. And so if there's not really a place for them to say, well, consent to treat, but I don't want you to use my information. And so that really should be separated out for broad consent for research purposes. So here is a quick summary, and then you can access that full list. And again, REC is going to determine whether or not something qualifies for exempt status. So these are examples when the research will not be eligible for exemption. So the surveying and interviewing of children does not fit. That exemption does not apply. The survey exemption does not apply. Okay, so this, and a lot of these I did as polls, because I'm just curious to see what everybody else thinks too. It's not always a clear right or wrong answer, which is what we deal with a lot too, is trying to use all the information to make the best determination. So, I would argue that this would probably fall again, you know, I'm just kind of putting some hypothetical examples in here. I would probably argue this would be like a quality improvement type of thing. If it's really being used, you know, by that program office to say, okay, like which students can we better support? Like, are there certain groups of students that we need to make sure we're providing support to? So that's my thought process. Okay, expedited review. This is gonna be just a level up in terms of the degree of risk from exempt, or if you just don't qualify for one of those exemptions. So now beyond more than like routine everyday life is, research that is just minimal risk. Okay, so this is another one we see a lot. There is no more than minimal risk. Well, if you are being asked to participate in research and it says there's minimal risk, well, that's acknowledging that there's something. So what is it? So just put in there what it is. And a lot of times, the main risk is just maybe, you know, the risk would be if this information was lost or, you know, stolen, breach of confidentiality, that type of thing. And then what would that risk be? So again, just acknowledging that, what that looks like. So here are some of those categories. I bolded the ones that I think apply most to the kind of research that, the proposals that we get here. So again, that like records-based research, interview recordings, those type of things, that's gonna be expedited. And then focus groups, that type of thing. Right, so then full board. These are gonna be projects that involve more than minimal risk. A lot of times, a lot of the research that involves children will qualify for this. There are some examples of where, research involving children might be able to be considered expedited, or where you saw some of those exemptions do apply. So it is not a situation where if it involves children, it's automatically full board review. So make sure you're working with your student to look at the categories and understand which one applies to their project. We do have to have quorum in order to approve these. All right. It's not letting me click. Okay, I was kind of curious to see what everyone thought about this. Interestingly, I feel like we've had quite a few come through with this particular questionnaire recently. And I did you know, confirm this is, and but correct me if I'm wrong, psychology friends, that this would not fall under the category of routine psychological evaluation. So that would therefore then not qualify as exempt status. So, maybe depending on the circumstances, it could be expedited, but, a lot of times we're looking at, how sensitive something is and, who the individuals are, all of those factors, your recruitment strategy, inclusion criteria, procedures and everything, to then kind of determine, all right, what's gonna make the most sense here. So. Program eval. Yeah, so again, like with all these, you could probably say, well, it depends on the specific details, but yeah, I think I would probably pick program eval on this one too. If, I mean, I think it would depend on the specific details they're looking at, but like say they're looking at aggregate data, for just, like turnover rate of certain, a group of employees or something and trying to consider like, okay, since we implemented this new program, has the turnover rate gone up or gone down? If you get into looking too much and maybe too much in the weeds of like, did you participate in this program and, getting feedback about the different individuals, then you might be starting to cross into a little bit of human subjects research. So a lot of the program eval stuff, I feel like there's like a giant gray area for that type of stuff. Okay, so I've shown this one before. This is on our website. This is just overviewing our review process, and that's what I kind of explained earlier, just about the timing. Is why it can take a little bit longer than like, what our turnaround time is from the review side. So. All right, so vulnerable populations. I think I have a question about this. Let's get what y'all think. Who's vulnerable? So prisoners, definitely, that one automatically is gonna need full board review, and we have special requirements. I'll have some more information on that here in just a second. Yeah, children, pregnant women or fetuses or newborns, so I'll kind of lump into that one category. Fair amount of people chose students. It could depend, like that's where that kind of like, you have to consider that coercion or undue influence coming into play. And with that, you also need to think about not just like, is there actual coercion happening or undue influence happening, but is there any chance of like perceived undue influence or coercion? So, again, that's where I think a lot of times, everyone's got, the intent is fine. But you just have to step back and think about, well, like with someone from the outside looking in, how might this be perceived, on the receiving side of things. So for these, it could be a little bit gray. but again, like it kind of depends on the circumstances. It's not just, okay, these are our categories. In terms of the regulations, like these are the 3 categories that they have there for, additional, considerations that have to be, followed, or just additional regulations, if you will, but the others, like, there's still, room for the REC or IRB to determine, do we feel like this is a vulnerable population, especially given the circumstances of the research. All right, so research with prisoners, there are some extra steps that have to happen. Again, exemptions don't apply. This is always gonna require full board review. And, there are only certain categories of research that you can do, with prisoners. And, so these are the categories here, all right? So it can't be any more than minimal risk. And essentially you're using like general population as kind of your reference point for that. So there's a whole separate list of 7 additional, considerations that have to be addressed. And so if you or your student is submitting research that involves prisoners as participants, we will ask them to answer all of these 7 questions. And depending on the situation, not necessarily specific to prisoner research, but is usually where it's most applicable, is that we may ask you to obtain a certificate of confidentiality as well. So it's just another safeguard. I think that process is on pause right now. Well, I guess a lot of things are on pause right now with the Department of Health and Human Services, but it's usually not too difficult of a process to obtain a COC. And all of this information is on our on the REC website too. All right, so again, for children, only certain exemptions apply. Has to be no more than minimal risk to be expedited. And then you have to consider now not only consent, but there's really a couple different things. So it's referred to as parental permission and then child assent, if that applies. You know, if the children are too young, but a lot of even younger kids, you can modify the assent form where they can still, you know, have, you know, that respect for persons, even for the children. So this is a good time to mention readability of your information and your documentation. So with your recruitment script and your consent forms or assent forms, the standard is 8th grade reading level. And we actually check that through the reading level feature in Microsoft Word. So I think we had one recently where the student didn't realize, like, they just thought we were kind of arbitrarily saying like, no, it's too sophisticated of language, but no, we actually check the numbers. So it needs to be 8th grade level or lower, unless there is some rationale for why it's higher. I mean, if you're including faculty or doctoral students, well, then obviously they're going to have a higher education level and a high, you know, be able to read at a higher level. That's fine. We have a place literally on the form where you can write that. So just write it in there. If they are younger, then the reading level is going to need to be lower. So it needs to be commensurate with their reading level. So we do check that. This is one, like, I feel like we always kind of go over this, but I mean, we have so many that this is one piece that slows down the review process. We get consent forms and recruitment scripts that are, you know, 12th grade reading level. And then we're in this back and forth. We won't send it for expedited review or exempt review. We won't even assign it out for review until that's fixed.
And directions for checking readability documents are on the REC website.
Yes, okay, yes. And if, yeah, if you don't know how to check it, it should auto-populate when you do like spell check.
You have to turn on one feature in Word. to do
Yeah.
that, And that's what the directions. say.
Yes, so there are directions there, but, it's not difficult to get to. I'm sure chat GPT can tell you how to do it. So just have them check it before they submit it. Yes. Okay, I was gonna say, I wanted to skip ahead to our new policies, but here they are. All right. So we did implement, and these have kind of been like there in practice, just not in writing. So we did develop some policies over the last year or two, I guess. And they are posted on the REC website. I'm not going through all of them, but I feel like this is a big one for us, as faculty, that, you know, essentially what's in italics here is we are not going to allow a recruitment of students in your research if they are currently enrolled in your class. That's the policy. So, there could be some very few situations where people make a case for, you know, for needing information in more real time. But the policy is that you need to wait until final grades are posted if you want to recruit students in your own class to participate in your research, okay? With that, a lot of times, people want to use extra credit as an incentive. And, that sounds great. It can be allowed, however, this should not be like just the normal practice. This should be considered an exception. There are multiple additional considerations to be made. And it in some ways can kind of become like a logistical nightmare, I feel like. A little bit of a can of worms. So it's allowable, but you have to follow the best practices. So you have to think about who all you're recruiting. There has to be equal opportunity for extra credit. So if they don't participate, you have to have an alternative extra credit assignment that is also not grade based. That's one of the key ones. And so then if you think about if you're recruiting widely across campus, you know, all the faculty that you're recruiting in, the program chair, everybody's got to be on board with that. So it's, you know, it's best to just try to have a different strategy. This is another one. We have gotten quite a few of these recently. So if you receive an email from someone outside of the institution or even possibly within the institution that is requesting for you to forward an email from your colleague at wherever, you know, to get faculty responses or student responses on their survey research, you have to get permission before you just blast people with that. So I think just from the ones I've received, but then also the requests that I've received in the REC role, like it would feel like spam. And so we decided that there needs to be a process of approval for this. Usually it's fine. But we just want to make sure, especially our students, that they're not getting spammed by people trying to, you know, use them as a convenient sample and constantly, then that's where then they're taking on that burden of research, and that's not fair. So we don't want to, you know, overburden our students with that type of stuff. So this is our process. you know, just, it kind of depends on what the details are, but please, if you're getting those emails, like, just send them my way and I'll make sure that they get through. That whoever needs to see them sees them and that we follow the process. Also. This is kind of a newer thing that's been coming up, a few times too, but, from the REC side, we are not going to approve a proposal that is asking, that involves the recruitment strategy of requesting student contact information. If you want to recruit students, that is okay, but that needs to look like you are sending your recruitment information to that program chair or the faculty, whoever it is, and say, will you please share this with your students in whatever way is you see fit? Right? Rather than saying, can you please give me your students' email addresses? I just, you know, I feel like that is one way of protecting our students, that they're not going to be expecting their faculty to be sharing their contact information for people's personal research use or whatever. So again, it's okay to recruit them, but just think about exactly how you're gonna go about that, so. Kind of go through the rest of these kind of quickly, just for the sake of time. So. It's the last section. So, this last one, if it is actually properly de-identified, then it's really not human subjects research. So you're not necessarily a human subjects research investigator, but all the rest of these, the one worth pointing out especially is if someone's just collecting paperwork, they're not an investigator. But there should be, again, an explained process for obtaining consent. That person is an investigator, needs to go through city training, and needs to be familiar with your study protocol. All right, so like I said, the students need your help, so we'd rather the students get over to here and be happy. But I know it can be kind of overwhelming, this whole process, so that's where just really having a system where you're working with them and they're not just left you know, on their own to kind of figure all of this out. So what can you help them with? Essentially all of the parts of their project. So ultimately, like I said, as the faculty advisor, you are the primary investigator. And so ultimately the responsibility is going to come back to you for making sure that they're following the regulations, any university policies, and that once they are approved, that they're actually following through and conducting the research in accordance with the approved procedures. So encourage them to use the worksheet, and help them think about like what methodology is going to make the most sense for answering your aims. Help them understand, like providing what their actual aims are. And then thinking through rationale for each of their procedures and their methodology that goes back to the aims and to the purpose. Okay. This one down here, please, please look at all of the whole proposal before you tell them to go and submit it in jot form. We oftentimes will give feedback, but really, you know, we have a lot of wonderful, faculty on the Research Ethics Committee. This is part of university service. And really, like, sometimes we do find ourselves asking, like, are we just editing their proposal at this point? Or, you know, like, where we're gonna draw the line? And so that's where, with you as the faculty advisor, if you can really work with them on the front end to edit things and make sure they've referred to the website, make sure they've referred to the regulations, decision charts, all the things. So that, you know, we are really utilizing our time to really look at those principles of, beneficence, respect for persons and justice, and not editing the proposal, okay? Because that's really out of our scope. So here again, I've shown this one before, but just kind of showing what that iterative process can look like. They should be coming back to you, and they should have your green light to submit in job form. So try to stop them from going rogue. Don't let them go rogue. These are the components. This is what the proposal looks like. We haven't had too many lately, and from time to time, we get a 30-page dissertation chapter, like 20 pages of intro, and I'm not doing that. So that's gonna get kicked back right away. And we want this REC proposal format, not a dissertation or a capstone proposal. Again, these components, as faculty and for your students, have them go through and figure all this information out before they get to jot form. And this kind of goes along with that going rogue piece, okay? But have them do this beforehand, so they know what selections they're gonna make. The last couple things are just some examples. This site permission is another one of those things that I feel like has kind of come up recently, where we're going back and forth requesting site permission. We're not trying to be nitpicky, we're just trying to follow the rules. So we need to have this in place. And it needs to be clear in the site permission that whoever is providing permission for that research understands what it entails. Okay, so this might be one of the last questions for you. Possible. Good, yes. So you still need permission from, like I said, going through that whole process. Whoever it may be, depending on what the exact procedures are, but you still need that permission, even if it's happening here. All right, so I think I've touched on all of these things, but again, these are some of the things more recently that we find ourselves discussing in REC, where we just need more information. More information about how you're going to keep the data confidential, what might happen if there is a breach of confidentiality, acknowledging that risk, considering, like I mentioned earlier, you know, how could just your recruitment or possibly consent process itself, as well as your other procedures, but I just feel like we've had a lot related to recruitment, especially just like how might that in and of itself be a violation of someone's privacy. So taking all these things into consideration. Also with data storage, there is a requirement, this is part of the federal regulations, that records are supposed to be maintained for 3 years after the study has ended. An exception to that is if you are doing interviews with recording, that there's an allowance for you, and it is recommended that you delete and destroy those recordings as soon as possible. You know, and if you think, especially where a lot of times that might be the only piece that really is identifiable. So what that would look like is you're gonna have your two separate sections, right? Like you're gonna still maintain your data for 3 years, but audio, video recordings will be deleted within X time after the data is transcribed or coded or whatever. So you have to figure out what that timeline looks like, but then you need to differentiate that in your proposal description as well as in the consent form. And then kind of another thing is we're getting a lot of just like, oh, I'm just gonna store it on a password file on my computer. Like, okay, is that a Spalding computer? Is that your personal computer? Where is that computer going? Who has access to that computer? All of those kind of things. Okay, I think this was getting to the point about asking people to share contact information, so don't do that. And then this is just a little bit of a revamp of some ways that you might be able to incorporate this process into your program or courses. Kind of steps through, start with city training. I know some programs will have their students like take a quiz or some sort of assignment over, confirming that they reviewed the website. I think our website's probably underutilized. There's lots of good information there. I don't mind answering questions, but a lot of it can, probably get a faster answer if you just check the website. So this is kind of my suggestions, but obviously, you can incorporate this how you think works best for your program. But I do think that worksheet is a good one, like having them look at the website, do the worksheet, because then that's gonna have that proposal prep piece be a lot faster. So these were just kind of like my ideas of how to fit that all in. But again, the main thing is that they need to give it to you before they give it to me. Okay, so that it needs or to us at REC. So you need to review it, sign off on it, and then have them submit it in job form. We did REC member training, and this was the part of like our checklist that we're all going to be using to look at for approval. So these are all the things that we have covered today. And then this is just showing you our website where it's kind of going through again all those steps. And always thank you to everyone on the REC. I really appreciate your time on the committee because I know it can be a lot more than what some of the university service committees are. So thank you. And I think that's it. Yes, thank you so much. If you, okay, let's see.
Kevin the person.
Okay. I do have, speaking of surveys, if you would like to provide feedback or suggestions, so you can scan this and give me some feedback. I know it's kind of long. I feel like I talked really fast, so I'm sorry that I just tried to touch on all the things. But if you want to give feedback for ways this could be better, or we've talked about possibly trying to host like some more workshop type of things that might be helpful for students and faculty. So I'd love to hear like your ideas for that. What your suggestions would be, like what kind of things would really be most helpful for you and your students. So I would appreciate your feedback. Okay. And that's it. Thank you guys for coming. If you didn't get food, please get food.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Dr. Castellano.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Sutton.
Eat it up. Yeah, and like I said, I'm happy to answer questions. Sorry, I skipped over that piece, but, welcome feedback, but if anybody does have questions, I'm happy to answer questions. And if you would like a copy of the worksheet just to have, so then you can make more copies for your program or whatever. Those are up there.
We didn't have it like this, but it's still hard. Sellers, like,
I said,
oh, already elaborate.
Okay.
I put it into the box, but I look at my notes. And so I was like, very good. Like, I do that.
Yeah.
Where it needs to go, yes, you do. That's a good idea.
well, at least you
Yeah.
represented it. So.
Yeah.
Because I could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
even-
Not even
sports.
Yeah.
I had to live, they didn't have to pay for it. I said they can do
Okay,
that.
yeah.
Cause we made our OPM, that we're saying, we made them turn the REC out. As a rubric, it can't be, so students. And that's how we assess. They made it probably like.
And
President chat. It's REC, so you.
Oh, yeah.
That's like.